in the Merkel years, there was a famous saying, like a variation of Maggie Thatcher's "Tina, there is no alternative," that Merkel called certain positions that they are without alternative, which is intellectually lame because you can always think something else than what you do. And it only stops the discussion. It ends everything because there's no alternative and you don't explain. And in times of a growing hunger for participation and a public discourse and engaged citizens because of social media and other forms of active participation in a democracy, you cannot just announce that I know better and I don't tell you this. So by this kind of a communication style, not explaining things properly and not getting people on board, you give birth to an alternative that comes as ugly as it appears, being xenophobic, Islamophobic, anti-Semitic, dreaming of a different political system, as some of the hardcore supporters of the AfD want Germany to become. But there's also a strong group of people who just feel lost. They see too much change and they don't feel represented. And that's the main difference when we compare it with the United States or with Poland or even with Turkey, that Germany is not in the same way polarized, because there is no alternative is only problematic if 80% of the parties represented in the German parliament are a variation of the same. And it allows a lot of different coalition scenarios, like who could flirt with whom and form what kind of coalition, because at the end of the day, they all want the same thing. They are strongly transatlantic and want to be partner with the United States. They are committed to European integration. They are pro-market economy. They are social to a certain extent. And they all totally understand that climate change is the most pressing problem. So if this is the same and there is no variation aside from minor details, people who don't buy this don't feel a home. And there's always been something like a certain percentage in each and every OECD country that is flirting with authoritarian alternatives, and they can be mobilized if the government doesn't deliver. And the current perception of the German government is that it does deliver, but it's expensive and it's complicated and it's not efficient, and they make a lot of technical mistakes in how they write laws and how they communicate them. So there's a lot of confusion and people feel dissatisfied with how the government appears. And the AfD doesn't even need to do anything. They just sit and watch and grow in support because of the poor performance or the perception of the poor performance of a government that is actively addressing reforms, what previous governments haven't done. So they also didn't make a mistake, but they simply postponed the necessity of making investments and addressing reforms on a large scale, which appeared as unpopular, so they didn't do it. So on the one hand, I'm glad that the government is addressing all these reforms. I'm less happy about the changing world that puts so much additional pressure on the plate of what the government is already doing. But I totally understand that this creates confusion and it helps right-wing parties or protest movements to find support. But I hope that the German institutional setting is sufficiently robust to deal with it.
Yeah, I think that's not, like, if the institutional setting is robust, it's probably not the concern or like the, you know, the mainstream opinion. But what would we say, like, could the AfD become like, you know, what in German you might call like a Volkspartei, like a more moderate or appealing to a broader public? Do you think that could be a scenario, or will it just, you know, never really play out and this is more like a temporary phenomena?
When I was referring to the stability of democratic institutions in Germany, because we have seen the disappearance of the party system as it existed in the past in Italy, in France. We saw Brexit as a major political revolution that ruined the reputation of the Westminster democracy in public perception. So there are fundamental changes in what we consider a Western-type democracy to be, including what's happening in the United States. So in comparison, Germany stands as a solid rock in which quality media and a widespread system of civic institutions and NGOs and the civil society is active and engaged and critical and whatever you need to make a living Western-type democracy work. But as you rightly say, there is a rise of authoritarian thinking and a different, more defensive strategy when it comes to migration policy, when it comes to how we trust in Western-type democratic institutions. And that is serious, but to what extent they would be willing and able, now willing, this is something that they are always dreaming of. They rather see themselves as center and mainstream and a people's party. But I don't think that they could possibly mobilize more than 20% who share the ideals. They can mobilize protest voters, but when you really look at the hardcore enemies of the Western-type democracy Germany is, then I don't think it's much more than 10% of those who flirt with the AfD or openly support it. So this is much more a mishmash of different forms of frustration, losing social status, being upset with a single issue like energy policy or a lack of investment in infrastructure, or the general frustration in the eastern part of Germany that also population-wise was shrinking a lot. We had something like 16 million East Germans at the fall of the Berlin Wall, and now we are down to 10 or so. So it is important as a part of Germany, but the population is 10 compared with 72 or 74 million. So this also needs to be put into perspective, which doesn't make it less difficult when you look at the situation in Saxony, for example, but it is still a special problem compared with what is Germany as a whole and what are the discussions about the AfD in different parts of Germany.
So you don't see any scenario where like a CDU or the opposition party could kind of like, align, their strategy slightly and therefore partner up with the AfD?
Well, we have a very heated discussion at the moment because we have this instrument of summer interviews with leading politicians who step back and look at the bigger picture. And this bigger picture interview of the head of the Conservative Party, that was also not entirely clear whether they want to call themselves a conservative party or what exactly is the new self-definition after 16 years of Merkel, who would certainly not call the Christian Democratic Union a conservative party and rather moved it to the center, knowing that you win elections in the center of the German population and you don't win much if you move to the more right edge of the political spectrum. So this is something like a reinvention of the CDU. And as part of that reinvention by its current leader, Friedrich Merz, he thought of the possibility to end the strict distinction between we don't form any form of alliance with the AfD no matter what, into, well, we can discuss what's happening on a municipality level. Like the local level is okay, but we would never form a coalition on a federal level. And this caused a shitstorm, not only across the board in the German public, but also within his party. And he was openly criticized that someone who says things like that doesn't qualify to be the next chancellor of the Federal Republic, although the polls would show that enough appetite for reform and the German people would rather want another CDU chancellor if elections will be tomorrow or next year. So that's still an open question in what direction we are moving. But I don't see the AfD being qualified to formulate answers to the questions of the 21st century.